lots of artists are currently sharing their Spotify Wrapped numbers, and you know what? No shade on them. If they are proud of something they've achieved, then good luck to them. I'm not. Don't get me wrong. This video is not about saying they shouldn't. It's more about why I'm not going to. Now, it's not like I have anything to hide. I'm quite happy to admit that I have a very small number of listeners. I mean, more than ever this year, which makes me pleased. But I'm still very small time when it comes to music. So this isn't coming from a perspective of somebody who's trying to hide the fact that they are not massively popular. It's more the toxicity that comes from these numbers. I mean, I've always had a problem with Spotify, and it is only Spotify as far as I know, telling you when you go to an artist's page how many monthly listeners they have, because that leads to all sorts of problems. It leads to people putting their songs on playlists, you know, botting, paying people to boost their numbers, because rightly or wrongly, and I think it's entirely wrongly, but you know, we could debate that, these monthly listener numbers make a difference. There are people who look at your monthly listeners and go, well, that's low, so I'm not going to listen to it because it can't be very good. Whereas if you go to an alternative streaming service where it doesn't have that number, then you're more likely to give new artists a chance, I think. You know, people say, oh, Spotify's great for discovery. And what they usually mean by that is the recommendations. But you'll notice most of those recommendations are always from very popular artists. If I look at what comes up next after listening to one of my songs, it's someone who's entirely related sometimes, and it's almost invariably somebody who's got, you know, 100,000 monthly listeners or whatever. So is that music discovery? Because it's quite easy for me to discover that music anyway, and in fact lots of them that come up I know already. What I want it to be doing is recommending smaller artists who are a bit like what I've just listened to. That's discovery. Discovering people who aren't already well known and people with record contracts. It's people who need to be discovered because they're making good music, but they just haven't got the traction yet because they haven't got the huge marketing budgets or the existing, you know, from before streaming record contracts. Now, I am in no way saying that all smaller artists are making good music. I would never be so bold as to say my stuff is great and deserves to be listened to just as much as these people with very polished records. That's not the point. The point is, it's not really discovery, is it? It's pushing you people who are already popular, and those numbers are all part of it. It's all part of getting those numbers up is the goal for almost everyone on Spotify, even when it comes down to such a local level, like trying to get yourself a gig, you know, going to venues, and they'll say, all right, you know, if they don't directly ask you, by the way, they'll check. They'll say, how many monthly listeners do you have on Spotify? That's just one of the things they ask. So much as I might like to get away from Spotify, in a perfect world, I wish everyone would stop using it and they all would listen to something like Apple Music or Tidal that pay artists 3 times as much. You know, that's what everyone should be doing if they want to support artists. But the thing is, Spotify have you hooked because you push people to Spotify because these numbers matter to everyone and Spotify knows it. It's toxic. And this whole rap thing is just the sort of height of it, because people feel compelled to put their numbers up and they say, you know, and again, I'm not detracting from anyone who does it. Good on you for getting lots of listeners. But Spotify have normalized not just artists, but people who listen to music, putting these numbers up. It's entirely normal now. It's like, oh, let's see your Spotify rap this year. It's just normalized it. And, you know, I really resent having, I mean, I do it too, right? I push people to Spotify. If I write a song, I'll put the Spotify link up because I want those numbers to go up. And I'm as guilty as anyone else. But I'm not going to put my Spotify, I'm not going to put what I listen to up, and I'm not going to put my artist stuff up, because I think it's time we ignored Spotify Wrapped. We ignore it. It's just a cynical way of getting everyone to care about numbers, and it shouldn't be about numbers, really, should it? The artist can see them. The artist can always see them. You can use your numbers as much as you need to market or see who's listening to your stuff where, or, you know, that's what the numbers are for usefully as an artist. You don't need those numbers to be public. Those numbers being public do not help you at all as an artist, because unless you're really big, you always have smaller numbers than anyone else, right? So there's always going to be somebody, yeah, you'll be bigger than someone, but you'll be a lot smaller than someone else. So it's a game you can't win. So let's not feed it. Let's try and do something better. Let's try to ignore those numbers, and let's encourage as much as we can, and the tiny voice we have in companies that giving £100 million of our money to Joe Rogan and not paying smaller artists. You know, the whole thing is toxic. Let's not help them. Let's not do their advertising for them by doing this rap thing.